Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we begin a 5-day program on technologies of hope, technologies that various individuals and companies in various parts of the world are deploying and researching and developing that can remediate some of the damage that technology has been doing essentially since the Industrial Revolution. Human application of technology has been the source of our modernity and the source of the ecological collapse and degradation that we see all around us. As we begin our program today, I want to just bring to your attention two updates that are, I think, very relevant to the question of technology. The first, and with real concern, is the development in Lithuania. As you all know, the United States has deployed 20,000 additional troops in Eastern Europe. That's in addition to the troops that the United States has in Germany. But up till the weekend, they were deployed in defensive positions. And the Lithuanian chief of staff has announced that the U.S. forces along the Russian border in Lithuania have now switched to offensive positions with the capability, he says, of beginning military action immediately. Obviously, the danger of the U.S. Being on the Russian border with offensive capabilities, with the technology that is at the command of the United States, takes what's happening there in both Ukraine and in Eastern Europe to a new level of danger, particularly in light of what the Secretary General of NATO, Stoltenberg, said, that the plan is to increase U.S. and other NATO forces from 40,000 to over 400,000. And so what we're looking at in terms of technology is the increased probability of a nuclear exchange. The other event that is worth noting is that today in Montreal, COP15, Conference of Parties number 15 on biodiversity, begins, and no head of states are showing up other than Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau, and that's because he's the host of the conference. What is expected, as Greta Thunberg said recently, is just more blah, blah, blah. And it is worth just our consideration that at a moment in our historical development, when our ecology is spinning out of control, and as climate change is now transitioning exponentially to climate disaster, what our governments, with wild enthusiasm, are doing is not solving that problem, but going to war. It's an extraordinary statement about the human condition, that when we need international cooperation in an urgent, compelling way, we are dividing ourselves. We are destroying the global infrastructure because of the Ukraine war. We don't have time today to go into some of the precursors and frame of references for how we got to this war. But the meta point that we all need to take in this morning, December 5th, 2022, is that the human race is in a fundamental way preparing itself for suicide. We are not attending to the issues of real concern. And we're radically destructuring the global infrastructure through war and aggression and militarization and sanctions, and in a way that is dividing the world in an unprecedented manner, right at the moment when the ecology is spinning out of control. And we all need to take that in. And at the center of all this is how humanity is deploying technology. Technology may be the demise of humanity. So in this program on technologies of hope, this is not just an intellectually interesting discussion, but it's a discussion around which the fate of humanity and the larger ecosystem may well turn. Consciousness and technology. How technology shapes consciousness and how consciousness shapes and deployed technology is the central enigma of our time. So welcome, everyone. Before we dive into our program, I want to just ask all of us to just pause, as we always do as we begin our Humanity Rising sessions. Sometimes the news that we have to internalize is pretty stark, as it is today with offensive US weapons and troops now along the Russian border in Lithuania. So let us just seek as best we can to bring ourselves into coherence. In a moment, you'll hear the sound of a bell. When you hear that bell, just breathe in slowly for about 5.5 seconds. You hear another bell and just exhale for 5.5 seconds. That enables you to breathe for 5.5 breaths per minute, and you ingest about 5.5 liters of air. It's the most coherent way to breathe, and it brings optimal health, coherence to the brain, to the heart, to the stomach more rapidly than any other single thing that one can do. So at the beginning of all our Humanity Risings, for those of you who are joining for the first time, we breathe together. We take 10 breaths. So welcome, everyone. Let us breathe. Thank you, everyone. One additional thought before we begin about this matter of consciousness and technology. The Indigenous people and Einstein and anyone else who's been paying attention have always said as Einstein said after we ignited nuclear weapons over Japan in 1945, that the consciousness that produces the problem cannot solve the problem. So as we think about technologies of hope, we need also to examine very carefully the consciousness, the motivation, the intention that is bringing these technologies into the world. Because consciousness and technology are two sides of the same coin. And so as we talk about the one, we need to consider the other. And as we consider the one, we will deploy, limit, or progress the other. So this balance between how we think and what we value and our ethical norms are actually the predicate for any meaningful discussion of technology. And I want to raise this issue because in the following days, over the next 4 days, I'm going to be talking more about this interface between consciousness and technology. I would like to now welcome my good friends and colleagues, George Caponelli, the founder and CEO of Age Nation, and Tom Eddington, the founder and CEO of Endangered Global, who will commence our program. George, Tom, welcome.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks very much. Delighted to be here, even in these challenging times, and perhaps because of these challenging times. When we envisioned this series, we did it because technology does have so many implications. And now that we are in the middle of this time of climate disaster, we're beginning to recognize that ever since that industrial revolution, we the people, we the users, we the population of so many different countries have made some fundamental mistakes. Because early on, a lot of the technology made work easier and faster and all the rest of that, we made some assumptions that it could cure everything. And we also made another fundamental mistake, in my opinion. We assumed that because we're in a free market economy, technology should lead the way, and we somehow or another should follow. And what we've discovered is that technology is a tool, and when it's used consciously, it can really aid and substantially increase values for humanity. But when we judge technology by its profit and its power alone, we get into this mess that we are currently in. So we're delighted to be able to bring you a group of voices over the course of this week, and hopefully over other weeks that follow in the new year, who are doing something different. They're using their skills and their talents and their imaginations to bring forward different forms of technology that do not negatively impact the environment, that do not necessarily destroy other species, and along the way our own as well. But instead, some of these technologies are actually mitigating, as Jim said, the damage that's been created. So we're delighted to bring you these gifted voices over the next few days, and we invite you to join us throughout the week and in the weeks that follow. Tom, would you like to say some opening things?
Yeah, thank you, George, and thank you, Jim. I love that the focus of this week is on consciousness and technology. So many of the leaders of industry over the last century or more weren't trained to think beyond the business that they were running. They weren't trained to think about the implications of the technology that they were bringing into the world and scaling. And as business has become more and more of a driver of the world, many of our leaders are desperately in need of understanding systems thinking, understanding the implications of the technology that they're ushering into humanity. And most technology is neutral. It's neither good nor bad, but there are unintended consequences when the leaders don't think through the implications of their technology. And I'll pick a simple technology that we all take for granted. But when we look at climate change, particularly deforestation, one of the leading causes of deforestation is roads. When a road gets built into a rainforest, into a place that was previously uninhabited by outsiders, we start seeing trees go down. And this is a really simple technology, a road. And yet it's a leading indicator of the cause of deforestation. And so, we'll be talking throughout the week about different technologies, and I believe that the extraordinary panel we've lined up this week are leaders who are systems thinkers. They do think about the implications of the technology that they've ushered into the world. So I'm very excited about the week.
Thanks, Tom.
George and Jim.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I just want to say one thing to balance a little bit of the opening. One of the things we love about Humanity Rising is that we have different perspectives. And although Jim speaks eloquently on this topic and has much deeper experience in the derivations of this current war in Ukraine, from my standpoint, one of the things that leads to greater consciousness is when we eliminate the poisons of individuals who are randomly and completely attempting to destroy another nation and another people. So while I don't support what the US or anybody else is doing, I don't also support what our friend in Russia is doing to completely bring havoc to our world today. That's just my personal opinion. Consciousness and technology. So I want to also let you know that not all of our guests today are going to be with us in person. They were originally scheduled to, and at least two of our guests, who Andrew Bailey is going to introduce shortly, are not here. So we did some pre-recorded interviews, and because their information is so vital and important. And in one instance, we're going to show you a short talk by Lila June Johnson, who does some just extraordinary work, and we could not let this program go on without her voice being present. So I'd like to, Andrew, will you turn on your video, please? Andrew, are you there?
Yeah, and it's not going on. I'm not a host.
You don't need to be a host to turn on
my video. Here we go.
There you go. Oh, great.
Yeah.
Thanks. So, ladies and gentlemen, Andrew Cameron Bailey, designer, builder, chemist, chemical engineer, photographer, filmmaker, inventor, author, entrepreneur, and visionary thinker. His organization is called Sacred Earth Enterprises. Andrew has been kind enough to invite two of his colleagues here to be with us, one in person at some point in the program, and the other simply by video. Andrew, what I'd like us all to begin with today, if you would give us a short and concise perspective on what you do and the work that you're bringing. And then we'll do the same with Joe and Brian, and then we'll introduce this short talk by Lila June, and then we'll have a dialogue. So you're off and running, please. And thank you for what you've done to make this program possible today.
Am I on? I think I'm on.
You are.
I need to put myself on speaker view, probably.
That'll get handled by George. Don't worry.
Okay, sweet. All right, George. Firstly, I want to say what a privilege and a pleasure and an honor it is to be kind of the opening act in this really important week on this really important day with the information that Jim Garrison, bless you, Jim, just shared with us. So I want to open with a quote, and that quote is from a popular rock song fairly recently in the last 7 years. And the quote is this: "The human race is a race that can only be won." That has two distinct interpretations, doesn't it? O-N-E and W-O-N, and both of them are true. We're in a race, we need to win it, and we are one, and we need to recognize and acknowledge that and open up to that. So the climate crisis is a crisis, first and foremost, of consciousness. What is consciousness? Consciousness is awareness. Consciousness, if we're conscious, it means we're awake. We're woke, to use a current term. That's a good one. We're the ones who woke up. That's not a bad thing, in my opinion. So the subject this week is climate restoration. This is a relatively new term that very few people were aware of when I got serious about this, which was 2015, and started deploying some of my technological capabilities, as you will see in the picture behind me. I put that in on purpose because a picture is worth 1,000 words. So that's 1,000 words less I need to say right now. This is a coherent, integrated system. Technologically, yes, but the technology is very often biomimicry. It's very often regenerative, and it's always off the grid, and it's always beneficial to its inhabitants, to the neighborhood it's in, and to the planet as a whole. So what is climate restoration? I'd like to mention that I met Brian von Herzen through a group called the Healthy Climate Alliance. You might want to check in on the Healthy Climate Alliance. Peter Fikowski started that about a decade back, and there's a very good definition there of climate restoration. It's something we must do. It is the name of the task that we collectively, humanity, must undertake if we're actually to live up to the name we so proudly gave ourselves, Homo sapiens. What does that mean? The wise ones? Well, for me, wisdom is a combination of knowledge. We have a lot of knowledge these days, and love. And we have a lot of love these days, but we also have a lot of fear, and we're in a lot of danger. And there's no question about all of those things. So my approach, I'm an old chemist and chemical engineer, and a builder, a designer builder. So needless to say, I've designed something, I've yet to build it. There's a picture, just one picture behind me here, and it has resulted in the concept. I believe we're facing a very dire situation. I believe we're going to have millions and millions and millions of climate refugees. So what this represents on one level is housing and jobs and food for many of those refugees, some of whom might be billionaires who used to live on the ocean front, but the ocean just rose 20 feet. What now? So we have a design that I can share my screen if we get around to that, but go on the website, sacredearthenterprises.us. It's all there. And there's a lot there. I can't go into that right now. A series of replicable, mass-producible eco-villages that capture carbon, produce food, reflect the sun's heat back into space, accommodate hundreds of people, provide jobs and food, and all kinds of other beneficial things for the local community, including the wisdom that we need to win the human race. How about that? I am totally honored to see my friend Brian von Herzen. I'm not exaggerating when I say that he might be the most significant and brilliant climate scientist on the planet, certainly. And I've been tracking a lot of people for quite some time through the Healthy Climate Alliance, through the Planetary Restoration Action Group, a gathering of genius, mostly white men with a median age of about 75 years. So Brian's one of the younger ones who brings true hope. And Joe Brewer, the author of, here's his book, The Design Pathway for Regenerating Earth. There's only one, Design Pathway for Regenerating Earth. These two men, I am so honored to have been able to record a pre-recorded conversation with them. And Brian, it is 2 o'clock in the morning, or 2, what is it? 2:26 in the morning in Australia, where he is based. He's an American, but he's working on the Great Barrier Reef. He's working in the Philippines. His specialty is marine permaculture. It's an ocean-based technology that is entirely nature-based, entirely harmonizing and synchronizing with the natural cycles of planet Earth. It's amazing. I just can't commend him enough. And Joe Brewer he calls himself a regenerator. He's all over the world, and he is into bioregional regeneration. How's that? And then Lila June Johnston, known her since she was 16. She's about 34 right now. Indigenous, young, brilliant, genius, extraordinary woman. We needed that. I wanted that on this program, and we were unable to get her directly. She's off in Mexico in an indigenous situation with no internet, as far as I can tell. So she will be represented by a recent TED Talk, a section from a clip she recently gave. So I'm going to get off right now. There's a whole lot I could say. I really wish we could sit down in a conference. I'm speaking to you, by the way, from Sunrise Ranch in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. We have 450 acres here. We have a 450-seat geodesic dome, which serves as an auditorium. I would like to see us get together physically in person soon to spend a weekend or a week at the very least talking about practical, realistic solutions and how we can work together. Because so far, we have been in our own silos. I've been in my little realm working really hard for the last 7 years. So has everybody else. How do we find each other? How do we come together? And bless Humanity Rising and Jim Garrison for hosting this extraordinary series that I've been on from back in the day when Jim was trapped in Holland at the beginning of COVID. So I'm going to hand this over to Brian von Herzen, who will either, I see you're on the screen, Brian, do you want to come in on person or do you want to come in using the recording? That's up to the tech folks here.
Brian, with your permission, I'd love to have you come in and join us live since you've taken the effort to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and share about 10 minutes or so about your incredible work. Would you prefer to do that rather than the recording?
Oh, I'm happy to do both, actually, George, and thank you so much. It's great to be here this morning. Marine permaculture presents an opportunity, I think, for us to really transform humanity's relationship with the ocean. We've had several centuries of extraction, I would say, and that is extracting resources from the ocean, extracting life from the ocean. And what marine permaculture endeavors to do is transform humanity's relationship in the ocean from extraction to regeneration. And it's about listening to nature and listening to the gaps, the nutrient value chain gaps that have been created through climate disruption, and addressing those gaps so that we like to say at the Climate Foundation, give nature half a chance and she'll rebound with exponential bounty. And that's what we're finding on land and in the sea, whether it's a matter of repairing our soils and getting back to healthy soil microbial communities, or the road less traveled, and that is in the sea, regenerating our kelp forests from Vancouver to the tip of Tasmania, and from the Indo-Pacific all the way to the Mediterranean. So we see this is a chance to really heal the damage that's been inflicted in the past centuries and get us back to a healthy climate. So that's what we're hoping to do with marine permaculture.
Brian, you've just been given a special acknowledgement or award, have you not?
Well, yes, we're very grateful to have been recognized just 6 months ago by the X Prize for Carbon Removal as the only nature-based ocean solution that could actually not only provide food security for billions of people who depend on the oceans today for their sustenance, but also to regenerate ecosystems from the kelp forest to the coral reefs that can actually get us back to healthy ecosystems that can support enough food, not only for humanity, but for the 8 million species who cannot vote. And finally, to measure the carbon that falls off our kelp forests every day, up to a quarter of the seaweed that's harvested falls off the platform during growth, sinks thousands of meters a day to the abyssal seafloor, where it remains for centuries in the abyssal ocean before it comes back to the surface. And so this form of carbon removal is what nature's been doing for eons. And by returning to nature-based solutions for balancing carbon on this planet, we see as absolutely essential. Because if we get to zero carbon, but it's on a dead planet, will we really have succeeded?
A very potent question. Tell us just a little more in specifics about how you do what you do.
Sure thing, George. I think 93% of global warming is in the oceans today. The ocean, in many ways, is the climate. If you look at what drives our climate, we keep talking about El Nino and La Nina and these different, thermal oscillations in the Pacific Ocean. That drives the whole climate system, from floods in Eastern Australia and Pakistan to droughts in sub-Saharan Africa and Southwestern United States. It's a global phenomenon. So we have to listen to the pulse of the ocean in order to address the climate challenges we face today. The challenge and the opportunity is to understand what are the ramifications of this warmer, hotter, redder ocean. And the ramifications really are that a warm ocean, a hot surface layer of the ocean, presents a barrier to the natural upwelling that feeds these kelp forests behind me. So all plants need nutrients, they need inputs. If on soil you need nitrate and phosphate and micronutrients, in an ideal world, those are provided by healthy soil microbial communities. In the ocean, and we're dealing with kelp forests, the kelp forests get their nutrients from deeper ocean waters. And in a healthy ocean, let's say you have an offshore wind. In California, they call them Santa Anas. In Europe, they call them Mistrals. But the offshore winds blow the warm waters away from the shore, and they upwell the deep, cool waters from the deep to the surface that irrigate these kelp forests and enable them to grow up to 0.5 meter per day. And actually, these kelp forests, under replete conditions, fix 15 to 20% more carbon than the Amazon rainforest. So in some ways, the Amazon rainforest of the Pacific Rim, from California to Australia, is really these kelp forests, because they absorb so much carbon. They create this fish habitat. These fish love to hang out in the kelp forest. If you have 1 billion sardines, you have your own habitat. But if you don't, then the sardines need to hang out in the kelp, because that's what will keep them alive overnight. Because if they don't have habitat overnight, then they get eaten that night. And so the challenge and the opportunity is to regenerate these kelp forest ecosystem services offshore. And to do that, you have to restore natural upwelling, because this global warming world has a lot of warming and a lot less natural upwelling just because of those energy barriers. So the challenge and the opportunity is to restore natural upwelling and get us back to where we were pre-industrially. In the last 100 years alone, we've lost over 3,000 square kilometers of kelp forest in the United States and Australia alone. That's just 2 countries. And these kelp forests are some of the most productive ecosystems in the world. So our challenge and our opportunity is to really restore that natural upwelling. Let's restore the 3,000 square kilometers of kelp forest that we've lost. And then let's see how our ability to support these kelp forests with a substrate, with deep water irrigation, to regenerate life in the ocean can work. And hectare by hectare, we think we can provide food security and livelihoods to coastal communities and measure the carbon export of everything we do, while really ensuring support for the vital ecosystems that keep us alive on this spaceship Earth.
Brian, Thank you very much. I'm so glad you're able to join us in person. What I'd like to do, if we can, Cameron, is introduce Joe's videos and Lila June's, and then come back to a real quality dialogue between those of us who are present here today. So, Georg, do you have Joe's video queued up?
Give me a second, yeah.
Okay. Cameron, in the meantime, do you want to come back on and give a little bit more information about Joe to the audience, please? You're on mute, I think, maybe. Yeah.
There we go. All right. Joe Brewer, like Brian von Herzen, in my not so humble opinion, is one of the heroes and the geniuses and the future luminaries of this planet who will go down in history, assuming their extraordinary visions are manifested. Joe Brewer is a relatively young man. He's from Missouri. He grew up under difficult circumstances in rural Missouri and has become a force of nature. So I just filmed him yesterday. We pre-recorded this, and here is Joe Brewer. It looks like he's ready to come. Are you there, Joe? Who are you? How did you get to where you are? And you're on, my friend.
Hello, everyone. My name's Joe Brewer, and I like to start my story by saying I was born on a chicken farm in rural Missouri. I start there because I had fairly humble beginnings and came from a place that I really didn't like in a lot of ways, but we had an insatiable hunger. So when I had the opportunity to go to college on a full ride scholarship, I just studied everything. I was really interested in philosophy and deep questions, very interested in physics and how the universe works, and was very interested in dance and theater and martial arts and doing things with my body. And during that time, as a young adult, I stumbled onto the world of chaos and complexity and started training as a complexity scientist, which really just means, in a nutshell, that I was interested in how patterns form and how interdependencies work for things in the real world. But it wasn't long before I was in a graduate program studying material science and learning about the intricacies of little molecules and how they interact with each other, when someone came and gave a talk about the importance of clouds in the global climate system and how much we can learn by studying clouds while looking at them through satellites from space, which had two really powerful effects on me. One was realizing that there are basic questions in atmospheric science that are still not answered, whereas in a field like physics, almost all of the really important questions were addressed and answered 100 years ago. So this idea that we can make fundamental important contributions as a young scholar in an area that seems so important just really had an allure. And the other was the Earth. It's just beautiful from space. So when you're looking at satellites, through satellites looking at the Earth, there's this very powerful thing called the overview effect of becoming transformed psychologically and even spiritually through the connection to the way that the Earth looks. It's just so beautiful. And so I ended up becoming an Earth system scientist. All that really means in practical terms is that I learned how the different processes and dynamics of the Earth interact with each other to create holistic patterns of behavior. How the ice at the polar caps relates to the circulation of the oceans, to the formation of clouds, to the movements of continents. And while I was studying these things, I had a front row seat to seeing just how much ecological harm and degradation is occurring, which drove me deep into depression and grief and caused me to drop out of my PhD program in atmospheric science. I was then studying at the University of Illinois and went off on my own to independently study the cognitive and behavioral sciences. The reason for this was that I was talking to a friend who said, that the big problems in the world that are not being addressed are largely because of issues of perception, mental models that people have, the values and norms of their cultures. And my friend who was studying the cognitive anthropology of religion said, well, Joe, if that's what you're interested in, you should go study cognitive science. And so I gave myself what I like to informally call an a PhD from Joe University, because I don't have a PhD, but I spent about 2 years reading about 80 books, 400 research articles all across the cognitive, behavioral, and social sciences. And I ended up getting hired by a place in Berkeley, California called the Rockridge Institute, founded by George Lakoff, doing cognitive linguistics work, basically studying how the human mind creates meaning and applying it to politics and social movements. And so flash forward, after about 15 years of doing work, applying all these different kinds of knowledge, we've come to a place now where most of what I do is a combination of on-the-ground regenerative work, restoring watersheds and rivers and soils and forests, together with the community organizing work that enables us to cooperate and create local living economies at the scale of entire landscapes. And so a lot of my work now is in the realm of regenerative design and the idea that it's possible to regenerate the earth. I've become the author, or I'm now the author of the book, The Design Pathway for Regenerating Earth, which explores how to do this in some detail. And it's a mixture of everything from grief and trauma healing through to reforestation practices and permaculture, mixed with pro-social processes of creating effective groups. And so that's just a flavor of me and the kind of work that I do. What I want to tell you about now is what happened to me when I understood the state of the world today, and which I'll go a little bit into in a moment, as I chose to become a father and bring a child into the world. So I'm someone who studied Earth system science. I understand ecological collapse as well as just about anyone. So I understand the risks and the threats that we're facing. And so it was a very serious issue for me to decide to have a child, understanding the risks and the dangers that my child, my beautiful daughter, who's now about to turn 6 years old, the dangerous future she's being born into. And so one of the things that we're doing now is learning how to create healing and harmony between humans and the rest of their environments at the scale of entire landscapes, at the scale of watersheds, coastal estuaries, mountain ranges, the Great Plains, places where we can create regional economies that are integrated with local culture and local ecology. Now, why is it that I care so much about doing this? Because, as I said before, I understand the seriousness and the sobriety of our current planetary predicament. A basis of my work is to understand how collapse processes occur, how there can be a stable dynamic order or a behavior for a living system. And then as we move beyond some critical thresholds, that order and capacity to self-organize breaks down and falls apart. And so a lot of what I'm interested in now has to do with planetary scale collapse patterns. And a framework that I find really helpful is the framework of planetary boundaries developed by the Stockholm Resilience Center. A planetary boundary, in brief, is a process of the entire living Earth that enables the planet to maintain homeostasis, relative stability of its climate and its biosphere at the scale of the entire planet. And so when a group of Earth system scientists got together, about 3,000 Earth system scientists, and they asked themselves, what are these planetary processes that there's some boundary where if we cross that boundary, we lose the ability to have stable planetary systems, which means we lose the ability to have a planetary civilization. And they identified 9. These planetary boundaries are things like the circulation of fresh water, or climate change and carbon dioxide emissions, land system change, which is turning complex ecosystems into degraded environments, the loss of biodiversity, the ozone layer, and so on. And they identified 9. And then they said, well, if there are 9, with our current level of knowledge, and this was in the year 2013, at our current level of knowledge, how many have we crossed? And they published a paper that came out in 2015. Remember, if we cross even 1, we lose the ability to have stable planetary systems and a global civilization. And based on the best information they had at the time, by 2015, we had already crossed 4. We had crossed the boundary for climate change, land system change, biosphere integrity, which is biodiversity loss or the rate of extinction, and geochemical cycles of nitrogen and phosphorus, which are used in industrial agriculture. We'd crossed the boundary on 4. Now in 2022, just a few years later, they've added 3 more. So we've now crossed 7 of the 9. What this means in practical terms is that we are deep in ecological overshoot, and we are right in the middle of a planetary scale collapse process that is only intensifying and accelerating, and is going to get much more intense in the next few decades, with much of the intensity beginning in the next few years. It's in the context of this knowledge that it was difficult for me to bring a child into the world, knowing that it's very likely that human population will reach a peak and start to plummet and reduce the human population in the next 20 to 30 years when my daughter is a young adult. And that it's actually possible that humans could go extinct by the end of this century. While the likelihood is still low of humans going extinct, even a low probability is just too much of a risk to even consider. So now the work that I do is to help people around the world learn how to regenerate the earth. Back in the end of 2019, I started writing the chapters of a book, The Design Pathway for Regenerating Earth. And instead of publishing the book, I decided that I would give it away for free so that it could get out into the world more quickly. And on social media, I put out an invitation. Who would like to join a study group to read the chapters of my book? We'll call the study group Earth Regenerators. 6 months later, there were 2,000 people on Earth Regenerators. It was a free open access learning community. To this day, now it has more than 4,300 members. It's open access, completely free to join. It's not an organization, it's a community. And the purpose of Earth Regenerators initially was to share the chapters of my book and to show that it's possible to regenerate the earth. But then after a few months, we started building capacities to share leadership and distribute governance and self-organize many different groups of activity. And then we started raising money to buy very degraded land and convert it into community demonstration sites and community commons, where I live in Bioregional, Colombia. We also raised money to support local projects and create tapestries of collaboration that operate and that succeed at the landscape scale. So this work has continued to evolve and grow to the point now where my partner Penny and I are seeking to activate bioregions, which is large-scale, landscape-scale capacities, places where humans could live in a sustainable way at the scale of watersheds, coastal estuaries, and other large-scale landscape features. And we're activating these landscapes by bringing models of cooperation and how to develop the emotional capacities to be in a group and the social capacities to work together as a group using a framework called pro-social, together with the tools of Common Land Foundation, which is an organization that works on large-scale landscape restoration, to create landscape funds and partnerships for creating collective visions and collective action at these large scales, and to create bioregional learning centers, which are basically core learning ecosystems where local people come together and share what they're learning and learn how to collaborate to map and evolve and guide the direction of development for their local economy and their local landscapes to become local living economies in harmony with the rest of nature. And because of what is happening at the planetary scale, we know that time is very limited to set this in motion. So we've set the goal that during the year 2023, in the next year, we will try to help activate at least 100 bioregions. Bioregions can be defined in different ways, and they range in number from between about 500 on the low end to 2,000 or 3,000 at the high end. And 1,000 landscapes would represent somewhere between a third and a half of the land area of the planet that doesn't include Antarctica, the areas where humans currently are able to habitate the land. So about a third of that land, which would be enough if we had 1,000 landscapes doing this work, that would be able to change the trajectory of the entire planet and begin regenerating the earth. And so what we're doing now is we're currently working with 8 bioregions. We've been doing this work specifically for about 2 months. So I'm working within one of the bioregions in Bioregional, Colombia, where we've been working now for about 3 years. Now we've added 7 more, and our goal is to get to 100 by the end of 2023, creating learning exchanges, social supports, and distributed ways of governing and sharing funding across all of these landscapes so that we can learn together how to restore soils, how to protect biodiversity, how to create different kinds of economic models, and how to collaborate with each other at the scales that are needed to be able to do this work. And so what I want to share with you today is, first, at every scale of this work, up to the scale of integrated landscapes, it has been demonstrated to work in different places around the world. What has not been demonstrated is how to create a network of these landscape scale projects that might organize at the continental scale. So in South America, where I am, to organize along the Andes Mountains and the Amazon River basins, which is 200 rivers that form the Amazon basin, to be able to collaborate at the scale of an entire continent, one landscape to another. So the next level is to teach a lot of people and create learning exchanges for a lot of people. How do we do this at the landscape scale, while at the same time spreading landscape collaborations to the continental scale, so that this can grow to the planetary scale? We want to get to 1,000 landscapes by 2030, which means we need to engage about 100 in the next year to get the process going with enough momentum to succeed. So I wanted to share this with you to give you a sense that there are people out there, we talk to them on a daily basis, who are taking very seriously our planetary predicament, are not falling into greenwashing or simplistic techno-fix kinds of solutions, and are working to do the deep, holistic healing work to be able to collaborate at these landscape scales, and at the same time to form networks of collaboration at continental scales. And that this is the work we need to do, all of us, for the rest of our lives, because this is work that's going to need to continue for the next 200 to 300 years to stabilize and restore the health of the entire planet. So that's what I came to share with you today.
Beautiful, beautiful piece of work. Shall we move to Lila June, camera? You're on mute again, I think.
I do mute myself just in case a phone rings or something. Hello there. Let's move on to yet another amazing genius. This one happens to be young, brilliant, Indigenous, and female. I wanted a balance in this panel, so courtesy of TEDx, Lila June Johnston.
Greetings, my relatives and my people. She'e Lila June Yanishye. My name is Lila June. Nanisht Ejitchachitni Nishlan. I come from the Nanisht Ejitchachitni matrilineal clan of the Dene Nation. We are also incorrectly known as the Navajo Nation. We are indigenous to what is now called New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and Utah. But we call it Denebakea, the people's land. Taos, New Mexico, Nasha. I'm originally from Taos, New Mexico. Akwit ego Dene Astananishla. In this manner, I present myself as a Dene woman. I'm here today to share a message of hope. This hope comes from what I've come across in my doctoral research. This hope comes from what Native people have proven is possible. For tens of thousands of years, Native people of this land constructed beautiful gardens all around them. Contrary to the myth of the primitive Indian, we were not passive observers of nature, nor were we wandering bands of nomads looking for a berry to eat or a deer to hunt. No. By and large, we were active agents in shaping the land to produce prolific abundance. We expanded and designed grasslands and forests for the benefit of all life And in many places, we still do these things. We became what the world calls a keystone species, or a species upon which entire ecosystems depend. And our cultures became keystone cultures, refined over time. Now, much was made last year about the positive environmental effect of the pandemic. As more people stayed home, pollution levels dropped, animals began to reclaim habitat, and the logical leap that many observers seemed to make was that the Earth would be better off without humans. I reject that leap. The Earth may be better off without certain systems we have created, but we are not those systems. We don't have to be, at least. What if I told you that the Earth needs us? What if I told you that we belong here? What if I told you I've seen my people turn deserts into gardens? What if these human hands and minds could be such a great gift to the Earth that they sparked new life wherever people and purpose met? I'd like to share with you today 4 important Indigenous land management techniques, ones I've identified through my doctoral research in hopes that they might inform and inspire us today. The first is to tap into and align ourselves with the forces of nature. Why try to control the Earth when you can work with her? In Southwest deserts, for example, native farmers have leveraged the pre-existing topography of the land. They place their fields at the base of watersheds to catch every drop of the monsoon rains and the nutrients that flow down with them, carried down from upland soils. This alluvial farming technique requires no outside fertilizers or irrigation because all of this comes with the rain. By tapping into pre-existing natural systems, native farmers have been able to cultivate the same plots of land for centuries without ever depleting the soil. Another fascinating land management technique is intentional habitat expansion. Why put plants and animals into farms and cages when you can simply make a home for them and they come to you? For example, Indigenous peoples have intentionally augmented grasslands for buffalo by bringing gentle fire to the Great Plains. For millennia, following the grass-burning moon of our lunar calendars, we would transform dead plant tissues into nutrient-dense ash, nourishing the soil and unlocking the seeds of pyroadapted grasses and medicines like echinacea. Over time, this fire would prevent trees and shrubs from taking over the grasslands and would nourish the soil to generate topsoils up to 4 feet deep. Many people think that we followed the buffalo, when in fact the buffalo followed our fire. In this manner, we anthropogenically expanded buffalo habitat as far south as Louisiana and as far east as Pennsylvania. A third strategy I want to mention is to decenter humans, create non-human-centric systems. Why hoard for your own species when you can live to serve all life around you? For example, coastal nations of British Columbia enhance fish habitat by planting kelp forests where the herring lay their eggs. This helps that small silverfish lay even more eggs, rebound in even greater numbers, and both the eggs and the hatched herringfish cascade up the food chain, nourishing so many other life forms, such as bear, salmon, orca, eagles, wolves, and more. Ironically, by seeding this food web and feeding all life around them, coastal nations have greater food security for themselves because they feed the hand that feeds them. The last strategy I want to mention is to design for perpetuity. Design for perpetuity. Why plan for just the next fiscal quarter when we could plan for generations not yet born? For example, tree pollen and ash fall onto ponds for millennia. They sink to the bottom and engrave an ancient story in the fossil record. One Kentucky sediment record shows how Shawnee ancestors took care of a chestnut food forest for over 3,000 years straight. A sudden influx of fossilized charcoal during the same period indicates that they managed it with routine burning of the forest floor. Presumably, this enriches the soil, helps the soil hold more water, and eliminates competing vegetation to boost the immune systems of the trees they selected. Apparently, it worked because it lasted for millennia. What if our systems were designed to last forever? So those are just 4 of many strategies that Native peoples and peoples around the world have used. Work with nature, expand habitat, decenter humans, and design for perpetuity.
Thank you, Georg. So, Andrew, what extraordinary voices. And maybe we can bring everyone back on screen and begin a conversation about just some of the things that we've heard already. And I have to tell you, you and our audience may not be aware of it, but in the near future, we're going to begin doing special weekend editions of Humanity Rising network that we're going to evolve to. And I encourage you to think about that conference at Sunrise Ranch. And we could do a whole weekend going really deep on this subject. It would be phenomenal.
Can I take the liberty of saying something, George?
Please.
I'm going to do something completely crazy here. My fiance will probably think I'm nuts, but she'll love it. I'm going to invite you, by you I mean every single one of you hearing this, to my wedding reception, which happens to coincide with my 80th birthday, and it's in mid-November next year, 1 year down the road, so we have time to plan. We have room for 450 seats in the Dome. We have hosted as many as 12,000 people here for the Arise Music Festival. We've had things like Tribalized 3, which is about 400. So we have 125 beds. So let's think about that next November for something. This is what I want for my birthday. It's my 80th birthday. I think I can ask for what I want, and it's that. As many of these extraordinary people to come together, share these ideas, and in the intervening 11 months, be in a position to show some real progress in each of our separate ventures and to have discovered how we are weaving this together into a coherent tapestry that Lila June Johnston would be proud of, coming from the Navajo Weaver Nation, something like that. And I preface that with the fact that Connie and I are getting married on Christmas Eve in Aspen, Colorado at the John Denver Sanctuary, and the reception will be a year down the road so we can have all of our friends come.
What a terrific idea and a great invitation. And that would put it just in perfect alignment with the evolution of Humanity Rising to Humanity Rising Network. And let's plan that weekend.
I'm in.
That sounds wonderful, Andrew. Thanks for such a kind invitation.
You've got a ways to come, but you've got family in America. You got to come, Brian.
Looking forward to.
Tom, you've been quiet.
Yeah, I'm just taking in what Joe shared with us, certainly what Andrew, you and Brian have shared, and Lila June as well. And there were a couple of things that stuck out for me in particular. One is that, Brian, as you were sharing we already know that restoring the oceans, particularly the kelp forest, and restoring the topsoil on the planet, those two actions alone will sequester most of the excess 300 gigatons of CO2 from the atmosphere. And yet, in the 1970s, it was still legal for commercial medical companies to throw medical waste into our rivers and our ponds and our oceans and our various bodies of water. And picking up on something that Joe was sharing, we still have this ignorance about how does humanity coexist with nature. And Lila June shared beautifully how the Dene have been doing that, and other indigenous peoples have been doing that for a very long period of time. And so Andrew and Brian, I'd love to get your take on how do we shift human consciousness to move us back to living with nature in the ways that will support. And when Joe said we're looking at several hundred years to regenerate and restore the earth, that's daunting, because as Lila June mentioned, we think about fiscal quarters. Most of us, don't think beyond our lifetime. And so it's a very daunting undertaking. And I'd love to hear, Brian and Andrew, your thoughts on that.
Oh, thank you, Tom. I'm here in the hinterlands of the Sunshine Coast of Queensland, Australia. And this land is actually the land where the consciousness of permaculture arose half a century ago. And I've had the honor of working with Bill Mollison's student, Dave, and Dave has, David Holmgren and I have written on permaculture, and it's about to come out in just the coming weeks. But what Dave shared with me is that Bill Mollison got his ecological training, if you will, in the kelp forest off of Tasmania. And so this was way back a half a century ago or longer. And he actually he had an encyclopedic memory and could tell you the names, the species of the fish and the seabirds and the mammals and the kelp forest and the different species of kelps. And he had this encyclopedic knowledge of that kelp forest ecosystem. And it was by studying the relationships between the flora of the sea and the fauna around me right now, and the seabirds and the mammals, and how they live together in such a rich and diverse ecosystem. That was his inspiration for permaculture that he brought to land and applied to the temperate rainforest of the Tasmanian coast. And the fact that these marsupials lived in that forest and got their habitat and their food and their sustenance entirely from the forest. And he thought, well, if marsupials can do this, why can't humans do it? Why can't we live in balance with the forest? And those led to Dave Holmgren designing and building and creating and formulating the dozen design principles of permaculture. And what Dave and I have done in this article that'll be coming out shortly in One Earth Journal, a peer-reviewed journal, is to apply the dozen permaculture design principles to the sea again. So literally, we've had circular consciousness going from the sea to the land, to the temperate rainforest, and back to the kelp forest again. And we're so honored to bring marine permaculture to the world, to understand that these design principles are so fundamental. They transform our consciousness and our relationship with nature. And by applying it to the sea, we're moving forward. But I'm coming to learn that perhaps the most important permaculture of all is the social permaculture of the way we live and work together. And what I want for us to do is to move beyond the tyranny of autocracy that we've seen so vividly in this year, past the tyranny of the majority in democracy, and to move to the consent of the governed. And I want to go back to the Haudenosaunee nations of America to look for that model. Because if you pull out a dollar bill, a US dollar bill, and you look at the emblems, including the eagle's holding 13 arrows that to represent the 13 colonies, but it didn't come from the 13 colonies. It came from the Haudenosaunee Nation and the legend of bringing together the 5 and 6 nations of the Haudenosaunee tribe together to form that arrow. And the legend is that if you take one arrow and you try to bend it, you can break very easily. But if you take 6 arrows and you try to break them all at once, you cannot. And that is the strength in unity. But I'll tell you, the Haudenosaunee had a very important governance approach, and that was the circle of clan mothers were the ones who nominated the circle of chiefs. We had the yin and the yang well balanced. And for 500 years, we had a peace across the Haudenosaunee nations. So that's a longer peace. They talk about Pax Americana in the 1950s. This was orders of magnitude larger. And, you know, there's this ancient saying that a native First Nations person went to New York and looked at all these high-rise buildings and, you know, everything. It's like, where were your women? Where were your women to tell the men to stop building? Okay, that's what we need is balance. And I believe that our Western civilizations are missing, in an ethereal way, the circle of clan mothers that can balance the circle of chiefs. Because in the Haudenosaunee Nation, the nation could not go to war without the circle of clan mothers really approving that. And furthermore, the circle of clan mothers could actually veto and eject chiefs from the circle of chiefs. And so it was that balance of yin and yang that led us to having a 500-year history of peace. And I think that's our challenge, is to build the social permaculture that that can really enable a transformation. I've studied sociocracy and other approaches. It doesn't make faster decisions, but it makes higher quality decisions. And that's what we need in this day and age, are higher quality decisions, and social permaculture writ large, bringing to all nations, to humanity, a greater consciousness beyond a reductionist thinking. I love to study and work with the Buckminster Fuller Institute, because Buckminster Fuller in the last century has brought integrative design thinking to our space. In a world of reductionism, can we move beyond just financial gain or just carbon? Because we need to have a living planet. We need to bring most of the species with us on planet Earth that we arrived with. You know, we need to really ensure the diversity and abundance. So those are my thoughts on how do we raise the consciousness of humankind in service of living planet Earth, ocean planet Earth.
Brian, you have just articulated as beautifully as I've heard before one of the reasons that in the coming year we're going to be expanding Humanity Rising to Humanity Rising Network. And we're going to have a channel on endangered, and we're going to have a channel on governance and democracy. And you are going to be a frequent guest if we can tear you away from your, but really beautifully said.
Thank you so much, George. It's such an honor to be here.
Yeah. Andrew, would you cover that same ground, please? Or
I will cover it in a subtly different way, or maybe not so subtle. Brian, you just laid down the groundwork for this event coming up 1 year down the road, which is known variously as my wedding reception and my birthday party, and a beautiful musical concert with a lot of inspiring music, and a gathering on the very subject of today's material here. And we'll be very specifically looking into the Haudenosaunee, the great law of the Iroquois. If anybody wants to look that up, that's a good thing to Google. Profoundly influenced Benjamin Franklin at the time of the founding of this nation, this very troubled at this point nation. I would like to share my screen, if that's okay, and read something that's going to take me all of 30 seconds, George, and that will be my statement on that. On this. Is that okay?
Please.
Let me see if I can do that efficiently. Where are we? Gotta be here somewhere. Don't quite know why that's not happening. Let me see what I can do. Yeah, come on, I just want to show that. Where is it hiding? Sorry about that. Every time I try to share my screen, there's something strange going on and it's not there. How can that be? Oh, it's desktop 1, I'm on desktop 2. Yeah, my system's too complex for my limited brain. Let's try this and then I'll see if I can, there we are. Are you seeing that?
Yes.
So in 2 words, Tierra Santa. What does Tierra Santa mean? It means sacred earth. It means Pachamama. It means beloved Mama Gaia. It means Mother Earth. It means everything that we mean by this planet we're on. This is a site plan, first draft, December 2nd, 2020. It is for a climate resilient co-housing eco-village. And it is, I'm just going to read the words down the right-hand side there, and you can look at it and wonder about the other. And if you look at the very bottom, there's a gorgeous young lady about to walk into a wormhole that will take you to heaven. And you can go there and I'll read to you. So this is a prototyping and demonstration site for a rapid deployment solution to the climate crisis. It takes a village. It's inspired by the Rocky Mountain Institute Innovation Center, Pythagoras, Buckminster Fuller, Arcosanti, Sacred Geometry, Holistica Tulum. If you don't know about that, look it up. It's amazing. Burning Man, Tribalize, Mama Gaia, and on and on. And a brief overview of what is this? It's plus or minus 10 acres. It investigates or engages in climate research and restoration. It is a community center. It is a carbon-free energy generator. It incorporates agrivoltaics. It incorporates regenerative organic agriculture, carbon capture and reuse, solar radiation management. It reflects heat back into space, permaculture, soil restoration, post-wildfire reforestation, fireproof architecture, eco-co-housing, science and art and purpose and business development. And if you have a look at that, it's simply a 10-acre, but here's the key word, it is replicable. We are going to have millions, if not billions, of climate refugees. And this is a proposal for an idea of something that we could use as part of our adaptation response, because the 4th leg of the climate stool, and I didn't even get to mention the 3 legs, is adaptation. It's changing so fast and we almost certainly have to adapt. And this is my proposal to adapt. 10 acres that does amazing things. Look at the center of that 10 acres, the kiva, meeting house / greenhouse. We get together in that kiva and we dream up the future and put it into effect. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. You know, one of the next stages, I think, of all of this work, when I listen to you, when I listen to Brian and Joe and Lila June, you're all saying the same thing, that these concepts and ideas, and one of the reasons we're doing this series called Technologies of Hope, is that if anybody can listen to this program and not have hope for possibility, then they've fallen asleep someplace during the early moments of our broadcast, because there's so much hope in the words and the spirit and the energies that all 4 of you as guests today are bringing. And I think that's why we're doing what we're doing with Humanity Rising, because we want to turn these kinds of informational dialogues and presentations into actions that actually change the future of our planet. And the 4 of you are just such superb examples of that. So how do we get more quickly to the social regeneration that you're talking about, Brian, or to those 1,000 communities that Joe is talking about, or to your 10-acre plots, Andrew? How do we get there in time?
I'll give a very brief 5-letter response. TRUST, trust. technologies of hope. Hope incorporates the possibility of failure. Oh, I hope it'll work. Huh? I trust it'll work. That doesn't mean specifically, it means TRUST. It's an acronym. What does it mean? It means truly rely upon Spirit's timing. Because when I look at the immediacy of this crisis, it's terrifying. And I just have to go way beyond hope, way beyond trusting the government or technology or anything like that. I simply have to trust the outcome, trust the process. We are evolutionary beings on a dynamic planet in an ever-evolving universe. I trust that universe. It's a spiritual thing.
I would like to second that, but then move beyond it to we're going to need regional food security across the world. And that starts in the ocean, often with healthy seaweeds, and then moves to agriculture on land. And it turns out with seaweed supplements, we can preserve food production with 20% less nitrate, 20% less fertilizers. We can help to build healthy soil microbial communities on top of compost and biochar. And the result is to ensure regional food security, because sadly, in many ways, the global network may be diminishing in terms of the transport of goods and food and whatnot. And so that it begins with food security. It moves beyond that for food security, not only for humanity, but for nature, as so aptly described earlier today. And then it moves to actually regenerating healthy climate. And that starts with nature-based solutions on land and in the sea. Reforestation on land and seaforestation in the ocean will be key to regenerating those essential ecosystem services that keep our planet thriving. And I think we have to get back to nature, give nature half a chance, and she will help us rebound with exponential bounty. The challenge and the opportunity is to get our boots on the ground and our fins in the water, as we're doing in the Pacific Ocean, to be part of the change that the planet needs on a planetary timescale, which is just a very short few number of years.
So we're at a place where we know how much money we spend on weapons and defense budgets. We know how much money we spend on a lot of different things. What kind of funding are we talking about?
Well, we are very happy that with the support of the X Prize and private family support, we've raised 2 of the 3 million that we'll need to build the first hectare of marine permaculture that we're expecting to be economically sustainable. And with that in place, we expect to be able to grow the number of hectares that we're cultivating, and the deep water irrigation. After we do 12 hectares, it'll be below 1 million per hectare. And then as we do 1,000 hectares, we'll be getting below 300,000 per hectare. So pretty soon we're going to have this very affordable approach to being able to grow hectares of kelp forestation in coastal communities all around the planet. And that's going to be a key to regenerating life in the oceans and really moving back to a healthy climate in the seas. That's a great start. And I just think we need to really lean into the early stages that are going to enable us to build thousands, if not millions of hectares and regenerate the kelp forests that existed pre-industrially. You know, a century ago, more than a century ago, the US Geodetic Survey mapped the kelp forests off the coast of California because they were navigational hazards. You couldn't reach Santa Barbara Harbor without crossing a river of kelp 1/2 kilometer wide that extended from Central California, Point Concepcion, all the way past the Mexican border. And sadly, over the past century, we've decimated that kelp forest not once, but twice. So that is no one's alive today with a living memory of the kelp forest that existed pre-industrially. And our challenge and our opportunity is to regenerate nature in her beautiful, magnificent bounty and diversity. And I think that's our challenge to get us back to a healthy climate in the coming decades.
Brian, is there a place that people can contribute to your work? Have you given us in the chat a link that would make that possible?
Yes, I'll put it there now. It's at climatefoundation.org. And we're having a campaign right now to raise that last million that will enable us to build the first hectare in the Pacific next year. And with that in place, we're looking forward to bringing marine permaculture back to America in 2024.
Cameron, the same with Joe and with you. Are there links that can go in the chat if they haven't been, that people can support Joe's work and your work and yours and Connie's work?
Certainly, I would like to mention my email, which is ACB, stands for Andrew Cameron Bailey, acb@circularcity.org.us. I'm sorry, acb@circularcity.us, if someone could put that in. And the information directly to my work is I've got a bunch of them. sacredearthenterprises.us. That website will give you a lot of information and a donation portal there. I do want to say one final closing thing, George, if I have a moment.
Please.
And that is that we opened this with the realization that the climate crisis is a crisis of consciousness. And consciousness is awareness. So let's think about awareness. And I opened with a beautiful quote. You remember, the human race is a race that can only be one, and the two completely separate but perfect meanings of that statement. It's gorgeous. But there's another quote I wanted to mention. This is from an American president named Eisenhower, and it is, be aware of the military-industrial complex. So somehow we humans have come to an agreement that it's okay to have something like 200 competing countries, each of them with their own militaries and their own borders and their own immigration departments, their air forces, their armies, on and on and on, at a cost to humanity of countless trillions of dollars every year. You asked what it's going to cost to make the change we need to make, George. If humanity could wake up to the point of saying, wait a minute, can we put the pause button on for a second here and take that money and spend it on the planet, on climate, on survival, on food security? If we had that money, we could do that 1,000 times over in a single 12-month period. That's the absurdity of where we stand right now. It's both scary and stupid. Sorry to say that word, but there we are. It is. Sometimes I wonder if we shouldn't be called Homo sapiens. We should be called Homo suicidus. I hate to use that, but if we go the way we're going, that's the way we're going. We're off the edge of the cliff. We could be lemmings reincarnated.
Tom, do you have some closing comments before we bring Jim in?
Yeah, I was just going to share a couple of things. So, Andrew, the point you were just making, most of the U.S. military leaders, their biggest concern is climate change, and the challenge they have is not with shifting the military's mindset, but it's shifting the mindset of the politicians who are driving a lot of their the budget and the choices that they're being forced to make. And so it's fascinating to me that, picking up on a couple of the points you both have made, that we've got 80 million climate refugees on the planet now, growing to 200 million by the end of this decade, and ultimately reaching about 1 billion people in the face of pretty significant climate change. And so, Jim has heard me share it many times now, climate disaster. And so, I appreciate what you both have shared, but my biggest concern is waking up enough people fast enough to scale some of the solutions that are being done by Brian and others. So those would be my final thoughts, and I really appreciate what you both have shared.
Embracing what Andrew said, President Eisenhower said once, if you can't solve a problem, make it bigger. And what he meant was go out of the box, solve integrated problems that will solve, and from a larger perspective, you can solve problems that seemed insolvable from a more limited perspective. So with that, I'll turn it back to Jim.
All right.
Thank you so much, everyone. I just have one. I know we're about at time, but Brian and Andrew, I would like to have you comment on Joe's assertion around the passing of 7 out of 9 climate tipping points in relationship to where you think we are in terms of 1 minute to midnight? Are we 5 past midnight? Because Brian, you're a very eminent climate scientist, as are you, Andrew. And so this question that Tom continues to raise around that we're no longer dealing with climate change, we're dealing with climate disaster. Would love to have your assessment as climate scientists on where we are in relationship to tipping points and the possibility of remediation. Because I think that's the $64,000 question that all of us are grappling with and have to somehow come to terms with.
Brian?
Well, that's a great question, Jim. I think in some ways, we've kicked the soccer ball out of bounds, and sadly, we may not be on a level playing field. We may have kicked it over the saddle and maybe kind of running away from us. Now, can we run really fast and go catch that soccer ball and kick it back over the hill? I think we still can, but it's going to require boots on the ground, fins in the water, and active support for regenerative technologies on land and in the sea to get us there. And a change of consciousness. We need to embrace permaculture on land. We need to embrace marine permaculture in the sea. And we need to embrace social permaculture, which will transform our consciousness. And watching a film some years ago, The Biggest Little Farm, the filmmaker I saw there, he said, the greatest thing that's going to transform our planet is our consciousness, that we can be the change, that can be the guiding force of Gaia to regenerate a healthy planet. In spite of reductionist thinking, in spite of limited vision, it's our consciousness of ocean planet Earth and her living wisdom that is going to get us back on a healthy trajectory. And that's my great hope for the future.
And as a grandfather of 5, I'm a terrible person, as you know, the environmentalists would say. I home birthed 5 little people with a beautiful woman who agreed to have kids with me, right? Those 5 people, you're not supposed to have 5, are each of them doing their share. They are amazing. Each and every one of my 5 children, I will actually do a little boasting around them. They have produced the next generation. I have 5 grandchildren. I am entirely dedicated to the principle that those grandchildren are going to have a world at least as good as the one I grew up in. Now, I was born in a pile of rubble, 1943, Coventry, England, the most destroyed city in England at the time. My daddy at the time was he turned the Triumph factory into a fighter plane factory, and they were building Spitfires and American Mustangs later in the war, on and on, right? Then he moved us out of that pile of rubble to Africa, where I grew up among the Zulus and the monkeys and the ostriches and the sharks in that beautiful ocean there. And you know what? I want my grandchildren to have a better experience than I did, because I was in a country called South Africa, which was run by a political party called Die Nazi. You heard that word, Nazi? Ever heard that before? Die Nationale Partei, which simply means the National Party. All Nazi means is national in the German language. So Nazism is simply America first, or Deutschland über alles, or any of those nationalist expressions taken to extremes. These are the scary things that we need to deal with, because apparently 50% of Americans are on that side of the Great Divide. Whoa. So anyway, we could go on for a long time in that regard. I just want to remind us, the human race is a race that can only be one. So let's adopt oneness, unity.
Beautifully put. Thank you so much. George, do you want to make any final comment and then tee us up for tomorrow?
Absolutely. I also want to say to those of you who have been conducting what I believe is one of the most active and in-depth chats that I've read in a very long time. I'm sorry we could not bring more of your comments and your the things that you have identified and said, but a really stunning chat today. So thank you for your participation in that regard. Since Bucky Fuller was mentioned earlier today, the quote that I use often by him, which is that we do have the opportunity to be the architects of the future rather than its victim. And that's certainly that has been beautifully amplified today. And maybe there's a word instead of either hope or trust, it's trope or something that somehow or another could combine those two forces. Tomorrow, our program is Technologies of Hope on Human Wellness. We're going to have two really fascinating guests, David Schmidt, who's just a crazy inventor with 70 or 80 or 100 patents that are bringing a lot of technologies in health and wellness. And one of his collaborators, a woman by the name of Onyx Cole. And so we look forward to exploring that in greater depth. And as always, this is a platform that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. And we're going to do our best to make it not only more global, but more extensive. And all of that comes from the efforts of this strange-haired man. We're joining here today with Jim and his imagination and his courage and his effort in helping to lay the foundation for all of this. So thank you.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Tom, Andrew, Brian. It's always powerful to just be in the presence of people like yourselves that are seeing so clearly what must be done and working so passionately toward that end. So your remarks have been very inspiring to me, and I think for everyone. And in terms of your comment, George, about the quality of the chat, I really want to acknowledge Kat Haber, who just is like a stenographer. So Kat, you are just totally amazing. And we thank you every time that you come on to provide the recording, essentially, of what everyone is saying. You're all welcome to the after session chat group. You'll see the link in the chat box, and you're welcome. It's an informal discussion that anybody's welcome to join. And then we'll see you again tomorrow for our second of a 5-day program on technologies of hope. We're also going to deepen this dialogue about the relationship between consciousness and technology. Because I think, as we've all agreed, that's the interface that we've got to somehow get right. If we succeed, as Brian says, I think we can catch up with the ball running down the hill. If we don't, then the ball gets away. So thank you, everyone. See you tomorrow.